It goes through my mind constantly. It will never go away.
But we simply can't jump to conclusions.
The biggest problem overall with the scene was it was completely destroyed and contaminated. It was terrible.
Do we have police officers who we are looking at as leads in this case right now? Yes, we do.
It had to have been somebody he knew, and I think it had to be more than one person out there.
It's exhausting to think about. It's frustrating, but mostly it's sad.
You're listening to True Crime Arizona, the podcast.
This is the last call for Sergeant Sean Drenth. Good night, sir. You will be deeply missed. Rest in peace. Frequencies clear.
Because of Sean, I know I'm a better husband, father, friend, and officer.
Hearts were shattered in Phoenix. October 2010, Phoenix Police Sergeant Sean Drenth found dead near the state capitol while on duty.
Always had a smile on his face, kind of guy that, kids would run up to and hug on the street.
This crushed his mom, Diane. The two were very close. Sean was only 34 years old. He was her only child.
Everybody should love their job that much in their lifetime. Everybody should.
Everyone wanted to know who killed Sean and why.
Our thoughts and prayers are certainly with his family, and we will be doing everything humanly possible to find out exactly what occurred.
But that's when things took a turn in the investigation.
When did it start becoming this suicide versus homicide debate?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when they first came here and they told me what happened and all that, there's an altercation, he was killed. And then we turned on the news like that night, and I saw a reporter saying apparently it was suicide. And I was like, what? Because that had never come up. And all the guys that had been here, that never came up.
One week earlier, life for Sean Drenth was seemingly great. His mom, Diane, said he had just been promoted to the South Mountain Precinct and was so passionate about police work.
Was he happy with that?
Yes, he loved it. It was the first time he was in charge of people, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it.
Sean was married to his high school sweetheart, Colleen.
Sean and Colleen were very happily married, and Sean always made a point of having lunch with her, and he always called her several times a day.
Life was going well, and then Diane got a knock on her door on October 18th.
I was at home, and it was probably about, 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe, when the doorbell rang.
She answered the door to find a group of officers standing there with Colleen, and she knew the worst had happened.
It goes through my mind constantly. It will never go away.
Sean was found dead under a tree near the Arizona state capitol. His lifeless body was found with a shotgun wound under his chin, his shotgun lying on his stomach. His handgun was found on the ground nearby, his uniform dirty on his knees. Officers immediately rushed to the scene, while those at Diane's house said it looked like Sean had been involved in some kind of fight. Phoenix PD began investigating.
But we simply can't jump to conclusions until we get more facts about the case.
But soon the conversation changed to something Diane never expected. There was something off about the crime scene. Things didn't add up. Officers began to believe Sean had taken his own life and staged it as a homicide.
There's not one little bit of me that ever believed for a nanosecond that it was suicide. I knew my son, he was very happy. Well, it's completely ludicrous. That would have to be a planned suicide, first of all. There's nothing in Sean's past. I have challenged different reporters, please go find, all I want is the truth, honestly. All I want is the truth. I said, please go find anything in Sean's life that would lead you to believe that he would plan a suicide.
Because the facts of this case are blurred, we took the case to a private investigator, unaffiliated with Phoenix PD. Kevin Booncher is a retired Tempe police sergeant and now hosts his own podcast called I Barely Got Here that chronicles his 24 years in law enforcement. We sat down with him for a couple hours to go over every detail of this case and asked him at the end to give us his expert opinion on whether he believes this was a homicide or suicide.
So this case was not with Tempe PD, it was with Phoenix PD, but you were still working for Tempe PD when this happened.
I was.
Do you remember the conversations that you and your other police officers had about this case at the time?
I do. You know, anytime a cop is killed, obviously that's a big deal. It's a big case. It's something that you don't forget. It doesn't happen very frequently. And when that case first broke, some of my guys worked task forces with other cities and everything else, and somebody was with a task force that had Phoenix people involved. So they were kind of up to date almost immediately as to what was unfolding. And everything at that point in time indicated to us that this was the homicide. You know, first and foremost, it's a terrible tragedy to have happen. And of course, in the back of your mind, I mean, I'm a cop. I was a cop for almost a quarter century. I still have all those feelings. I feel terrible for the widow and the family and all those other things. But as a cop also, you know that you can flip the switch and you have to look at things subjectively.
That's exactly what Kevin did. We started with the crime scene itself.
And I think the biggest problem overall with the scene was it was completely destroyed and contaminated. It was terrible. You cannot give up your integrity of managing the scene. You can't let people come in and out of there because one footstep, one sneeze, I mean, anything can contaminate that. And my understanding was, well, it's not my understanding, it's fairly true.
There were dozens of
There
officers.
were dozens of guys, and I get it. I understand all of those things. I mean, this is your brother, there's been killed. Of course, your immediate assumption is gonna be homicide. So you're not thinking straight, you're just rushing in there.
So, I mean, would you go as far as to say that Phoenix PD botched that initial investigation from the start in terms of the crime scene itself?
You know, botched is a strong word, and I hate to use it, but I think that any Phoenix person, Phoenix supervisor would admit that that's exactly what happened.
But even with a compromised crime scene, there was evidence that was concrete. The fatal gunshot wound was from Sean Drenth's shotgun, not his handgun, which was found on the ground over a fence.
So you start to look at where the guns were found, the fact that the shotgun was used, which is typically, and again I can't say for sure, but is typically secured inside of the patrol car. How did that shotgun get unsecured and out?
Sean would have had his handgun and a backup handgun on him.
Because a lot of people don't know that a cop is carrying a backup and or they don't know where it's at. So, you know, your primary method would be that primary handgun in the holster on the waist, and then a secondary would potentially be knowing, finding, acquiring the backup that's on the ankle. For them, he, she, them to take the time to not only incapacitate him enough to get that shotgun, which you can't just get in there and grab it. Most of them have a keyed access. And most people who are not police officers really don't even understand a lot of how those mechanisms work to secure those rifles or shotguns within the squad car. So it would take some work.
Kevin says another oddity is how Sean was found if a fight with a suspect or another person went down.
Just a basic fight that goes to the ground, you got more than scratches on your uniform pants. Stuff is torn up. You've got scrapes, you've got elbow scratches, you got, you know, if they happen to hit you, you got bruising and abrasions on your face. And if you were fighting for your life, I think it would be much more severe than dirt on your knees.
The questions kept coming. Why would Sean only have dirt on his knees if he was in a fight? How did another person get access to a shotgun locked in the police car instead of using one of the two handguns Sean had on him at the time?
I wouldn't say that on its immediate face right away any cop would walk up and go, oh, this is staged, of course. But as you start looking into things, and again, comparing homicide scenes to this one, there were things that started to look a little strange. I do believe it was a suicide staged to look like a homicide. And the shotgun is one of the elements that leads me to that conclusion. And the reason for that is, as a cop, we know that a handgun round to the head is not an definite 100% life ender, if that makes sense. I mean, I personally know of 3 people who shot themselves in the head, both when I was working and since, that they didn't die. and they actually recovered to varying degrees of recovery. So you take that knowledge base of being aware of that and having been on the scenes or hearing things, and again, the 3 that I know of firsthand, I know of 10 more secondhand that occurred. That's not the case with a rifle or a shotgun. I mean, if you use, those things are so much more devastating and cause such a huge wound channel, as they would call it. And, you know, I don't want to get gross and I don't want to get into the specific details, but I've never seen a suicide with a long gun or a shotgun that was not fatal.
But many had another question that doesn't add up. Remember, he was shot under the chin. His shotgun was lying on his stomach.
What about the recoil of the shotgun? So when they found him, right, shotgun's laying like this, wound is right here. There was only about 4 inches between the gun and that wound. So many people have asked, well, if he had shot himself, how would it have laid so perfectly?
Just falling just where it was.
Right where it was. Can you give some insight on if that's even possible?
If a police officer was struggling with someone who had their shotgun, I don't know how that placement of the weapon could occur. I mean, obviously it could if they were incapacitated, I suppose, but that's just a very strange wound location if there was a struggle involved and then he was shot. Was he kneeling? Was he laying down? Was he standing up? I don't know. We have no idea, but all those combinations of things could lend themselves to that gun going any different direction. It would be laying on the side.
Right.
Of course, because probably 99 times out of 100, that's what would occur. But you still have that one time. And really strange, weird things happen that, you know, you look back on them even now and you still don't know why or how it happened or can explain it, but the fact is it did.
If Sean wanted to commit suicide, why go to the lengths to make the scene look like a homicide?
And I think he felt that this is a way for me to try to provide for my family. And the thing that we haven't brought up at all was the fact that there were criminal charges pending against this police sergeant for some crimes that were committed within the department.
Over 24 Phoenix police officers were being investigated for fraud.
This is about number of hours worked at an off-duty sites that they were being paid for that they didn't work. Sergeant Sean Drenth was part of the investigation, and as I understand it, he would have met the AG's office criteria for grand jury consideration.
Ultimately, 4 police officers were indicted for theft shortly after Sean's death. Sean likely would have been indicted too. Some in the community thought that officers involved in the fraud investigation could have been involved in Sean's death.
Do we have police officers who are suspects? Absolutely not. Do we have police officers who we are looking at as leads in this case right now? Yes, we do.
Kevin says the fraud investigation could have been weighing heavily on Sean, even if he didn't show it.
When your persona and your whole being is being a cop who is this great person, but you know this serious issue is coming down the pipe and it's going to definitely blacken your reputation, that makes people do things. That's why the suicide rate is so horrible in law enforcement. It's kind of like that dirty little secret. A lot of cops take their lives, and a lot of times it's the same thing. We find out and then you're like, I had no clue. I had no idea that person was going through whatever they were going through. Cop suicide is a huge problem, and it's really pushed under the rug. I think he was by himself. I don't think he would have brought someone else into that. I think that would have been a burden that he wasn't willing to share with somebody, for the same reason that he didn't tell anybody what he was going to do. I think he wanted everything to be status quo.
I asked his mom about the fraud investigation.
Do you believe that incident was involved in his death?
I really don't. I think it was put out there. Here's the thing, that investigation had been going on for years, and we knew about it.
It wasn't new.
Sean knew about it. It wasn't new. Sean was promoted to sergeant even though that investigation was going on. And then I feel like somebody who knew about it made sure it got out there as the only motive they could ever find for suicide.
The medical examiner ruled it a suicide too, but there are aspects of that conclusion that don't make sense either.
If you really thought it was suicide Maybe you would have interviewed his mother, because they never interviewed me.
Phoenix police never talked to you?
Never. The detectives were in my house twice. They never talked to me.
Should Phoenix police have interviewed his mom about that?
I would think typically they would have. I'm a little surprised they didn't, especially when you have a very high-profile case like this. They'll interview people that are almost completely removed from the issue just to make sure that they cover all the bases, and they do, reach out for that tiny tidbit of information.
And even more bizarre, what's happened with Sean's widow, Colleen, and the city of Phoenix.
At the end, they ruled in Colleen's favor for full benefits.
We talked to Colleen on the phone.
Yes, I have the full benefits of line of duty death. All the people with the money have paid out line of duty death.
This has huge significance if Sean's death was ruled a suicide.
That wouldn't happen in full if it was a suicide, right?
That is my understanding. If there is a suicide, the officer's family does not receive full line of duty death benefits.
Is that the city saying, we don't think it was a suicide?
I think you have to take a look at how lawsuits are settled. Frequently, those lawsuits are settled with a payout.
Phoenix police told me the case is closed.
And if the widow is pulling full line of duty death benefits, then the conclusion would be that it was labeled as a homicide. But if it's labeled as a homicide that has not been solved, I don't know how that could be closed. No one's ever going to know really what occurred there.
The Drenth family isn't accepting suicide, and they aren't keeping quiet about what they think happened.
Do you think he was killed by somebody he knew?
Yes. It had to have been somebody he knew, and I think it had to be more than one person out there, to be quite honest, because he would have had to have been distracted somehow, even by a friend. It had to be someone he knew. I absolutely believe that. I do believe it was somebody in law enforcement, and I believe they did know how to stage the scene.
Diane thinks her son went to that location for a specific reason, to meet with another police officer.
To this day, I still believe very strongly that he knew something, and that he was meeting with someone to tell them, look, this can't go on. I'm not going to cover this. You got to fix this, whatever it was. Unfortunately, we don't know what that is. We've never figured it out. I think that he knew something that he hadn't shared with anyone else, because he would keep your secret and give you a chance to make it right.
Sean's love for police work was obvious. He loved working for Phoenix PD, but Diane thinks among the department he loved was the person who took his life.
So just to be clear, do you believe it was somebody within Phoenix Police Department that killed Sean?
I do. I do. I believe it's somebody that he knew in the Phoenix Police Department.
I asked the Phoenix Police Department to sit down for an interview with me about the case. Not only did they say the case is closed, but they told me nobody is available for interviews at this time.
Do you think it's surprising that Phoenix PD won't do an interview with me about it?
No, not at all. It's a hot topic. I wouldn't do it. If I was the chief of police, I'd say, we're not going to do that. Because what do they have to gain?
I asked Kevin about the theory that a Phoenix police officer pulled the trigger on Sean Drenth.
Is that possible? Do you think that's probable?
Possible, yes. Probable, no.
The pain his death has caused so many over the decades is heartbreaking.
He would want us to go on, but it's hard to do that.
There's been no closure for anyone, no definitive answer of what happened out there and why he died. Although we interviewed Kevin for the story, several law enforcement experts have also told me they believe it was a suicide staged as a homicide.
It doesn't detract from the fact that it's terrible. I feel horrible. I mean, you almost feel guilty sitting in my chair telling you these things, because obviously, his family and his widow, well, they're probably not going to be real happy with what I have to say, but at the same time, I just believe that you have to put out the information.
Sean's mom and widow Colleen are adamant it was not suicide, and the fight for justice for Sean has taken an emotional toll on Colleen over the years.
It's exhausting to think about. It's frustrating. But mostly it's sad. It angers me. But overall, sad.
Diane will fight for her son until the day she dies. But until then, she can only hope somebody will come forward with something new, anything that could help her figure out what happened that night.
It's been 10 years. Please, if you know something, please. You know, we just want answers. Like I said, it's not even that I want somebody punished or, sent to prison for the rest of their life, but I want to know why. I want to know what was so bad that I lost all the rest of those years with my son.
I'm journalist Briana Whitney. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, produced by Sergio Hernandez, edited by Mike Abbott. You can find our podcast and latest investigations wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the video versions of the podcasts on the AZ Family app, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire.